You are listening to The Cost of a Shortcut. Written by Akumah and voiceover by Cora.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 1. The Desperate Choice. Jake Reynolds sat at his desk, staring at the open textbook in front of him, but the numbers blurred together like an unreadable mess. The quiet hum of the library did nothing to calm his growing anxiety. The math final was tomorrow, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't wrap his head around calculus. "You're wasting your time," a voice said from across the table. Ethan Carter leaned back in his chair, spinning a pen between his fingers. "If you don't get it now, you're not gonna get it in one night." Jake ran a hand through his messy brown hair and sighed. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Ethan. Just saying, man. You're overloading yourself." Ethan tapped the side of his head. "It's all about understanding, not memorizing. And cramming last minute? Bad strategy." Jake knew Ethan was right, but it didn't help. Unlike Ethan, who barely studied and still got perfect scores, Jake had to work twice as hard just to scrape by. And this exam wasn't just any test, it was the final one before college applications. A failing grade would tank his GPA, and his parents wouldn't tolerate failure. "You don't get it," Jake muttered. "I have to do well. I can't afford to mess up." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why? So your parents don't murder you?" "Basically." Ethan scoffed. "Dude, my parents don't even check my grades. You should try that sometime. Zero stress." "Yeah, well, your parents aren't mine." Jake shut his textbook in frustration. His dad had already warned him, no top-tier college, no future. It didn't matter that he was trying his best. It was never enough. Ethan glanced at the clock. "All right, we've been here for 3 hours. You want to grab a snack or something?" Jake shook his head. "I need to keep studying." "You need to chill." Before Jake could argue, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out and saw a message from his girlfriend, Emily. "Emily, hey, I know you're stressed, but don't stay up all night. You got this." A small smile tugged at his lips. Emily always knew how to calm him down. "You and Emily are sickeningly cute," Ethan teased. "She's still trying to keep you sane?" "Pretty much." Ethan grinned. "She's a keeper." Jake nodded, but the anxiety remained, heavy and unshakable. The pressure mounts. That night, Jake sat at his desk in his bedroom, pages covered in equations scattered around him. He had tried to focus, but nothing made sense. His dad's voice echoed in his head. "If you can't handle pressure now, how do you expect to survive in the real world?" He groaned and buried his face in his hands. He was drowning, and no amount of studying was going to save him. His phone buzzed again. "Ethan, you freaking out yet?" "Jake, obviously." "Ethan, you're overthinking it. Just don't bomb the test and you'll be fine." Jake stared at the screen, a thought forming in the back of his mind. A desperate, reckless thought. He hesitated before typing. "Jake, I can't fail this, Ethan. What if I borrow some answers?" There was a long pause before Ethan replied. "Ethan, you serious?" "Jake, I just need a little help. I'll fail otherwise." "Ethan, dude, that's a terrible idea." Jake's hands trembled as he typed. "Jake, please, Ethan. I wouldn't ask if I had another choice." Another long pause. Then finally, "Ethan. Fine. But just this once." Jake exhaled, relief washing over him. "Jake, thanks, man. You don't know how much this means to me." Ethan didn't reply. The test begins. The next morning, the school hallways buzzed with students cramming in last-minute studying. Jake walked to class, his heart pounding. Emily met him outside the door. "You okay? You look kind of pale." "Yeah," Jake lied. "Just nervous." She smiled and squeezed his hand. "You'll do great. Just breathe." He nodded, guilt creeping in. If she knew what he was about to do, she wouldn't be so supportive. The bell rang and students shuffled into their seats. Mr. Callahan, their math teacher, stood at the front of the room with a stack of test papers. "All right, class," he said. "No talking, no notes. Eyes on your own paper. You have 1 hour. Begin." Jake's hands were clammy as he picked up his pencil. He glanced at Ethan, who sat 2 seats over. Ethan barely looked at him as he slid his paper slightly to the side, just enough for Jake to see. Jake hesitated, his heart hammering. This is wrong. But so was failing. Swallowing hard, he glanced at Ethan's answers and quickly copied them onto his own paper. The guilt burned in his chest, but he pushed it aside. He just had to get through this. One mistake wouldn't ruin everything. Right? The clock ticked steadily, a constant reminder of how much time Jake had left. His hand felt stiff from gripping his pencil too tightly, his heart still racing from what he'd just done. He had copied nearly the entire test from Ethan's paper, careful to change a few answers here and there so it wouldn't look identical. But even with the precaution, his stomach churned with unease. He barely registered the time passing until Mr. Callahan's voice cut through the silence. 5 minutes remaining. Jake's breath caught. He looked down at his paper, double-checking everything. The numbers blurred together. Had he copied too much? Had he changed enough to not raise suspicion? His pulse pounded as he forced himself to focus. Ethan, seated 2 seats away, remained motionless, already finished. Unlike Jake, he didn't look nervous at all, just bored. He was probably regretting helping him. Jake swallowed hard. It's fine. No one will notice. Just act normal. The final minutes ticked away and Mr. Callahan clapped his hands once. Time's up. Pencils down. Jake dropped his pencil as if it burned him. The entire class rustled with movement as students handed in their papers. He wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans before standing up, forcing himself to walk casually to the front. When he placed his paper on top of the stack, it felt heavier than it should have. A weight settled in his chest as he turned back to his seat. Ethan shot him a look. Relax. But Jake couldn't. An uneasy victory. The moment the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Jake hurried out of the classroom. He needed fresh air. Emily caught up to him in the hallway. See? That wasn't so bad, was it? Jake forced a smile. Yeah. It was fine. He grinned. Told you. You're way smarter than you give yourself credit for. His stomach twisted. If only she knew. You up for getting coffee after school? She asked, nudging his arm. You deserve it after stressing over that test for weeks. Jake hesitated. He wanted to say yes, to pretend everything was normal, but the guilt clung to him. I have some stuff to do at home. Emily frowned. You sure? You've been so tense lately. Yeah. Just tired. She studied him for a moment, then leaned in and kissed his cheek. All right. Rain check then. He nodded, managing another weak smile. As she walked off, Ethan appeared beside him, hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets. That was painful to watch, Ethan muttered. You're the worst liar. Jake shot him a glare. I don't need a lecture, okay? Wasn't planning on it. Just saying if you keep acting guilty, someone's gonna notice. Jake clenched his jaw. I'm fine. Sure. Ethan smirked, then patted his back. Relax, man. You got away with it. But Jake wasn't so sure. The first sign of trouble. The rest of the day crawled by, the weight of his actions growing heavier. Every time he saw Mr. Callahan in the hallway, he felt like the teacher was watching him a little too closely. By the time Jake made it home, he was exhausted. His parents weren't back from work yet, which was a relief. He didn't have the energy to pretend everything was fine. He tossed his backpack onto his bed and collapsed onto the mattress. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe he was overthinking everything. His phone buzzed. Ethan, see? We lived. No big deal. Jake stared at the message before typing back. I guess. Then, dude, stop worrying. No one suspects a thing. Jake let out a slow breath. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe. A new message popped up. Emily, hey, did you hear? Mr. Callahan said there was an issue with the test scores. He's reviewing them. Jake's blood ran cold. Cracks in the plan. The next morning, Jake walked into math class with lead in his stomach. The atmosphere in the room was different. Tense, uncertain. Students whispered to one another, shooting confused glances toward Mr. Callahan, who stood at the front of the room with a stern expression. Jake barely managed to sit down before Mr. Callahan cleared his throat. All right, class, he began, adjusting his glasses. I wanted to address something before we begin today's lesson. As you all know, I take academic integrity very seriously. That's why I review tests thoroughly before finalizing grades. Jake's hands clenched into fists beneath his desk. Mr. Callahan's gaze swept over the class. During my review, I found some irregularities. Specifically, 2 tests with answers that were nearly identical, down to the exact mistakes. A hush fell over the room. Jake felt like he couldn't breathe. Now, I won't be naming names yet, Mr. Callahan continued, but I want to make one thing clear. Cheating is not tolerated in this classroom. If the students involved come forward now, we can discuss consequences privately. If not, I will be forced to escalate this matter to the administration. The silence in the room was deafening. Jake's pulse roared in his ears. His skin felt hot, his shirt suddenly too tight. He didn't dare look at Ethan. He knows. He knows. Mr. Callahan's eyes lingered in their direction for just a second too long before he turned back to his desk. I expect the responsible parties to make the right decision. Jake didn't hear the rest of class. His mind was drowning in panic. As soon as the bell rang, he bolted for the door, but Ethan grabbed his arm. Jake. I can't talk right now, Jake muttered, yanking free. He needed to think. He needed to fix this. The weight of guilt. Jake sat alone at lunch, poking at his food without eating. His mind was racing. If Mr. Callahan already suspected something, it was only a matter of time before they got caught. What if they reviewed the handwriting? What if someone snitched? A tray dropped onto the table across from him. He looked up to see Ethan, arms crossed. You need to chill. Jake stared at him. Are you serious? He knows Ethan. Ethan shrugged. Yeah, maybe. But there's no proof. He's fishing for a confession. Jake shook his head. What if he finds proof? What if he takes this to the principal? Ethan leaned forward. Then we don't confess and we play it cool. He can't prove it unless one of us cracks. Jake rubbed his temples. I don't know if I can do this. Ethan exhaled. Look, man. I get it. You're freaking out. But panicking isn't gonna help. Jake bit his lip. Ethan made it sound easy, but it wasn't. The guilt was suffocating. Just don't do anything stupid, Ethan warned. If you act normal, this all blows over. Jake nodded weakly, but deep down he wasn't sure if he could keep the lie up. Because the weight of what he had done was already crushing him.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to The Cost of a Shortcut. Written by Akumah and voiceover by Cora.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 2, The Walls Close In. Jake had never been so aware of time before. Every second felt drawn out, stretched thin by the pressure sitting heavy on his chest. His mind replayed Mr. Callahan's warning over and over. If the students involved come forward now, we can discuss consequences privately. If not, I will be forced to escalate this matter to the administration. It had been almost a full day since that announcement, and the school still buzzed with rumors. People whispered in the hallways, speculating about who the cheaters were. It's gotta be someone in third period. Callahan looked pissed. Someone's in deep trouble. What if they expel them? Jake kept his head down, shoulders tense. Every time he passed a group of students, he felt like they were talking about him. Maybe they were. The principal steps in. By the time math class rolled around, Jake's nerves were shot. He slid into his seat, feeling every muscle in his body tighten as Mr. Callahan entered the room. Today, however, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Principal Reynolds, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. The moment she stepped inside, the energy in the room shifted. People stopped whispering. Jake swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists beneath his desk. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat. Before we begin today's lesson, I have an important announcement. The entire class held its breath. Due to concerns regarding academic integrity, Principal Reynolds will be reviewing the recent exam with me. We are currently investigating the irregularities, and we will be calling in students for individual discussions as necessary. A murmur rippled through the room. Jake's heart pounded. Individual discussions? They're going to question us. Ethan, sitting 2 seats away, leaned back in his chair like this was nothing more than an inconvenience. He glanced at Jake and gave him a small shake of the head, his silent way of saying stay calm. Jake tried. He really did. But his leg bounced under the desk and sweat prickled at the back of his neck. Mr. Callahan's gaze swept across the room. That is all for now. Let's begin. The first student falls. Jake barely registered the lesson. Numbers blurred on the board, words became white noise. All he could think about was when his name would be called. And then, near the end of class, it happened. Michael Carter, please come with me. The entire room went still. Jake turned his head just slightly, enough to see Michael, a quiet, straight student, blink in confusion. Me? He asked. Yes. Principal Reynolds gave a firm nod. Michael looked genuinely baffled as he stood and walked out of the room with her. The door shut behind them. Whispers immediately exploded across the classroom. Michael? No way. He'd never cheat. Maybe they got it wrong? Jake's stomach twisted. They're questioning people who weren't even involved. Ethan leaned toward him slightly. See? They don't know anything yet. Jake didn't answer. Because if they were willing to pull in students at random, it was only a matter of time before his name was called. The pressure rises. Lunch was even worse than the morning. Jake sat at his usual table with Ethan and a few others, but everything felt different. His food sat untouched as his stomach twisted into knots. Emily nudged him. You could. He forced a nod. Yeah. Just tired. You look stressed. Before he could answer, Michael Carter walked into the cafeteria, his expression pale. He grabbed a tray of food, then moved quickly toward his table. The entire room watched him like he carried some kind of cursed knowledge. Jake's pulse spiked. What did they ask him? What did he say? Emily followed Jake's gaze, then whispered, I heard he didn't even know why they called him in. Ethan scoffed. They're throwing darts in the dark. No real proof. Jake wanted to believe that. He really did. But something told him this was only the beginning. The offer he can't ignore. By the time the last bell rang, Jake felt like he had survived a battlefield. He was packing up his things when a voice stopped him. Jake. A word. His blood ran cold. Mr. Callahan stood near his desk, expression unreadable. Jake's throat tightened. Sure. Ethan shot him a warning look but said nothing as he left. Jake swallowed and approached. Mr. Callahan crossed his arms. You've been distracted all day. Jake forced a nervous chuckle. Yeah. The whole cheating thing has everyone on edge. Yes, it does. Mr. Callahan studied him closely. That's why I wanted to speak with you. You're a bright student, Jake. I know math isn't your strongest subject, but I also know you've been working hard. Jake's mouth felt dry. Thanks. Mr. Callahan sighed. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to believe you were involved in this. Jake's stomach dropped. What? Mr. Callahan gave him a long, measured look. I know you. You're not the type to take shortcuts. But if you made a mistake, if you got caught up in something, now is the time to come clean. If you do, we can handle this quietly. Jake felt like the walls were closing in. This was it. His way out. A confession now would mean consequences, yes, but not as severe as if he got caught lying. But then he thought about Ethan's words. They don't know anything. They're just fishing for a confession. He was trapped between two choices. Admit the truth and deal with the fallout, or keep lying and hope it all blew over. His mouth opened, then closed. I don't know anything, he whispered. Mr. Callahan sighed, disappointment flashing in his eyes. All right, Jake. But I want you to think about this carefully. Because once the truth comes out, and it will come out, there's no going back. Jake nodded stiffly, turned on his heel and left. But every step felt heavier than the last. Because Mr. Callahan's voice echoed in his mind. The truth will come out. And Jake had no idea how much longer he could keep running from it. Jake barely made it out of the classroom before his legs started shaking. He kept his head down, moving quickly through the crowded hallway, trying to focus on anything but the weight of Mr. Callahan's words. The truth will come out. His backpack felt heavier than usual. The air in the hall seemed thicker. He could hear every whisper, every snicker, convinced that each one was about him. The paranoia was getting worse. By the time he reached his locker, his hands were trembling. He fumbled with the combination lock twice before managing to get it open. Jake. He stiffened. Ethan leaned against the locker next to his, arms crossed. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with something unreadable. You could. Jake exhaled sharply. No. Ethan's eyes flickered with understanding. Callahan pulled you aside, didn't he? Jake nodded stiffly. Yeah. Gave me the whole, I don't want to believe you did this, but if you come clean now, we'll go easy on you speech. Ethan scoffed. Classic. They're bluffing. If they had any real proof, you'd already be in the principal's office with your parents on speed dial. Jake shut his locker a little too hard. I don't know, man. They pulled in Michael today. What if they start questioning everyone? Ethan clapped a hand on Jake's shoulder. Then we keep our mouths shut. No one's gonna say anything because no one knows anything. If they can't pin it on anyone, they'll drop it. Jake swallowed. And if they don't? Ethan's expression darkened for half a second before he forced a grin. Then we make sure we don't give them a reason to suspect us. Easy for him to say. Ethan had this effortless confidence, this ability to breeze through problems like they were minor inconveniences. But Jake? He wasn't built for this kind of pressure. The paranoia grows. The walk home felt longer than usual. Jake's mind was a storm, every thought crashing into the next. What if Callahan was already onto him? What if someone saw something that day and was just waiting for the right moment to come forward? What if Ethan was wrong? By the time he reached his house, he felt sick to his stomach. He barely said a word to his mom as he dropped his backpack by the door and headed straight for his room. Collapsing onto his bed, he stared at the ceiling. Confessing had been an option earlier. But now it felt like a gamble. If he admitted the truth, Ethan would be dragged down with him. And Ethan would turn on him, he knew that much. And yet, the truth will come out. Jake squeezed his eyes shut. What if Callahan was right? What if it was just a matter of time before everything crumbled? More students questioned. The next morning, the atmosphere at school was different. Tense. Jake didn't even have to ask. He knew more students had been pulled for questioning. By lunchtime, the rumors were spreading fast. Ms. Reynolds called in Haley and Jordan this morning. Are they just interrogating everyone now? I heard they had to write statements. Jake felt like he was suffocating. He could barely eat. Every time he picked up his sandwich, his stomach twisted. Ethan, on the other hand, was unfazed. See? They're throwing darts in the dark. If they actually had proof, this would be over by now. Emily frowned. It's weird though. Why pull in students at random? Ethan shrugged. To scare people into snitching. Jake's throat tightened. That was exactly what he was afraid of. A new threat. By the end of the day, Jake was completely drained. He just wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and pretend none of this was happening. But as he was heading toward his locker, a voice stopped him in his tracks. You and Ethan need to be careful. Jake spun around to see Michael Carter standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Jake's heart nearly stopped. What? Michael crossed his arms. They know it was someone in our class. They're narrowing it down. Panic clawed up Jake's throat. And why are you telling me this? Michael gave him a long look. Because people are starting to talk. Jake's blood turned to ice. Michael leaned in slightly. They think it was you. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears. Who's they? Michael shook his head. Doesn't matter. Just watch your back. And with that he walked away. Jake stood frozen, the weight of Michael's words pressing down on him like a lead blanket. They think it was you. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real. And if Jake didn't do something soon, everything was going to come crashing down.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to The Cost of a Shortcut. Written by Akumah and voiceover by Cora.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 3. Cracks in the Foundation. Jake felt like he was walking through a battlefield. The whispers followed him down the hallway. Stairs lingered a little too long. Conversations stopped abruptly when he passed by. He tried to act normal, to ignore the growing tension, but it was impossible. Michael's warning echoed in his head. They think it was you. But why? No one had proof. No one could have seen anything. He had been careful. Hadn't he? Jake's grip tightened on his backpack strap as he turned a corner, only to nearly collide with Emily. Whoa, she said, stepping back. Sorry, Jake mumbled, avoiding her eyes. Emily, unlike the others, wasn't looking at him like he was guilty. But there was something different in her expression. Concern? Hesitation? Are you okay? She asked. Jake forced a nod. Yeah. Just tired. Emily studied him for a moment before lowering her voice. People are talking. Jake swallowed. What are they saying? Emily shifted uncomfortably. That you and Ethan were acting weird after the exam. That you suddenly started avoiding people. And now that students are getting called in for questioning, people are starting to connect dots. Jake clenched his jaw. They're just rumors, he said quickly, trying to sound indifferent. Emily hesitated before nodding. Yeah. Probably. Jake felt sick. Cracks in the plan. He found Ethan leaning against their usual spot near the cafeteria, eating chips like nothing was happening. They think I did it, Jake said, voice low. Ethan glanced up, unfazed. Who? Everyone. Ethan rolled his eyes. You're being paranoid. Michael warned me. Emily basically confirmed it. People are talking, Ethan. If they keep pushing, we're screwed. Ethan popped another chip into his mouth. Relax. No one has proof. Jake glared. They don't need proof if they've already made up their minds. Ethan sighed, finally lowering the bag of chips. Listen. If they had anything, we'd already be in the principal's office. They're fishing and you're panicking for no reason. Jake exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Ethan's expression darkened. Then don't screw it up for both of us. The words hit Jake harder than he expected. Was that all he was to Ethan? A loose end? Before he could respond, Ethan pushed off the wall. We just have to lay low. Don't act guilty and they'll move on. Jake watched him walk away, feeling the first real crack in their friendship. More than just whispers. By the time the final bell rang, Jake just wanted to go home. He grabbed his stuff and walked quickly toward the exit, keeping his head down. Hey, Jake. He stopped cold. Turning slowly, he found himself face to face with Mr. Callahan. Got a second? The teacher asked. Jake forced a nod, even as his stomach twisted. They stepped into an empty classroom. Mr. Callahan gestured for Jake to sit, but he remained standing. You're a good student, Jake, Mr. Callahan started. That's why I wanted to talk to you first before this gets out of hand. Jake's fingers curled into fists. Before what gets out of hand? Mr. Callahan folded his arms. I know you and Ethan are close. And I know that the two of you were acting unusual around the time of the exam. Jake's breath caught. The teacher continued. I'm giving you a chance to tell me the truth before this goes further. Jake's mind raced. Was this another bluff? Or did Callahan know something? He forced himself to stay calm. I didn't do anything, he said, voice steady. Callahan studied him for a long moment before sighing. All right. But if you change your mind, my door is open. Jake nodded stiffly and left the room as quickly as possible. The fracture. Ethan was waiting for him outside the school. You good? He asked casually. Jake shook his head. Callahan called me in again. Ethan's jaw tightened. What did he say? He knows something. Ethan scoffed. He knows nothing. Jake stared at him. Why are you so calm? Don't you care at all? Ethan shrugged. What do you want me to do? Freak out. That's how people get caught. Jake exhaled sharply. I can't keep doing this, man. Ethan's expression hardened. So what? You gonna turn yourself in? Jake hesitated. Ethan took a step closer. You do that and it's over for both of us. Jake looked away. The guilt was eating him alive. And for the first time he wasn't sure he could stay quiet. Jake felt like he was drowning. The school had become suffocating. Every glance felt like an accusation, every whisper like a knife to his spine. He knew it was only a matter of time before the rumors turned into something more. Something real. By the time he got home his mind was still racing. He barely spoke to his mom, just mumbled something about being tired before locking himself in his room. But sleep didn't come. Instead he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Callahan's words in his head. I'm giving you a chance to tell me the truth before this gets out of hand. His teacher knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be dangerous. And Ethan? He wasn't worried at all. Jake sat up abruptly. He had to talk to him. A desperate conversation. Sneaking out wasn't hard. His mom worked night shifts at the hospital and his dad was too tired to care where he went. By the time he reached Ethan's house, it was nearly 11 p.m., but the window to Ethan's room was open, the blue glow of his computer screen casting shadows against the blinds. Jake picked up a small rock and tossed it against the window. It took 3 more before Ethan finally appeared, looking down with an annoyed expression. What the hell, man? Ethan whispered, opening the window wider. It's late. Jake didn't respond, just motioned for Ethan to come down. Ethan sighed but grabbed his hoodie and climbed out, landing softly on the grass. They walked a few houses down to a small park, where they sat on the swings, the only sound the creaking of metal chains and the distant hum of crickets. Jake broke the silence first. I can't keep doing this. Ethan let out a short laugh. You keep saying that, but here we are. I mean it, Jake snapped, gripping the chains tighter. Callahan is on to us. And if they find out, it won't just be detention, we could get suspended. Maybe even expelled. Ethan leaned back, kicking at the dirt. So, we don't say anything. They can't prove it. Jake clenched his jaw. What if they do? Ethan finally turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. Are you thinking about telling them? Jake hesitated. That was enough. Ethan's voice dropped, low and sharp. You do that and we're both screwed. You act like this isn't a big deal. Jake hissed. But it is. This could ruin everything, college, our futures. Ethan's eyes flashed. My future is already ruined, Jake. Jake froze. Ethan scoffed. You think I don't know what's at stake? My grades aren't like yours. I needed to pass that test. This was my only shot. Jake swallowed hard. He had never thought about it like that. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, man. I get it. You're scared. But panicking is the worst thing we can do. Just lay low and this will all blow over. Jake stared at him, heart pounding. He wanted to believe that. But deep down he knew it wasn't true. The final straw. The next morning, Jake barely made it through his classes. By lunchtime he was exhausted, stomach in knots. He picked at his food but couldn't bring himself to eat. Then he saw it. A note slid across his table. No name. Just one sentence. I know what you did. Jake's breath hitched. He looked around but no one was paying him any attention. His hands shook as he folded the note and shoved it into his pocket. This was it. Someone knew. A breaking point. He found Ethan after school, leaning against the lockers like nothing was wrong. Jake grabbed his arm. We need to talk. Ethan sighed. Again. Jake shoved the note into his hands. Read it. Ethan glanced at it, then rolled his eyes. Seriously? This could be from anyone. Someone messing with you. Jake shook his head. What if it's not? What if they do know? Ethan crumpled the note. Then we stick to the plan. Jake exhaled sharply. There is no plan. Just waiting and hoping we don't get caught. Ethan stepped closer. You need to calm down. Jake's fists clenched. You don't care, do you? Not about me, not about what happens. Ethan's expression darkened. I care about not getting caught. And if you're too much of a coward to handle that, then maybe you should confess. But don't expect me to go down with you. Jake stared at him, stunned. That was it. The final crack. Ethan wasn't his friend. Not anymore. Without another word, Jake turned and walked away. And for the first time he knew exactly what he had to do.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to The Cost of a Shortcut. Written by Akumah and voiceover by Cora.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 4. The Consequence of Silence. Jake had never felt this alone. He had spent years believing that Ethan was his best friend, someone who had his back no matter what. But last night had shattered that illusion. Ethan didn't care about him, he only cared about saving himself. The note in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole through his jeans. I know what you did. The words haunted him. Someone knew. And they weren't bluffing. By the time he got to school the next morning, his stomach was in knots. Every whisper in the hallway sounded like an accusation, every glance felt suspicious. He needed to do something. He needed to make a choice. A silent classroom, a heavy decision. Jake's heart pounded as he walked into Callahan's classroom. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him like a storm cloud. Callahan barely looked at him, scribbling something on the whiteboard while the rest of the class settled in. Jake took his seat but he couldn't focus. His hands were clammy, his leg bouncing under the desk. His mind screamed at him to speak up. To end this. But fear held him back. He imagined standing in front of the principal, his parents' disappointment, the whispers that would follow. Would he lose his scholarship? His college applications were already in. Would this ruin them? His future dangled on a thread and the scissors were in his hands. He glanced at Ethan, who sat 3 seats away, looking as relaxed as ever. Jake clenched his jaw. Ethan wasn't worried because he knew Jake was the weak link. He knew Jake wouldn't say anything. And maybe he was right. The note, the threat. The class dragged on, every second stretching into an eternity. Then right before the bell rang, something slid onto Jake's desk. Another note. His stomach flipped as he unfolded it. Last chance. Confess or I will. Jake's breath caught. His eyes darted around, searching for anyone watching him. Nothing. Who was doing this? And why did they want him to confess so badly? His hands trembled as he shoved the note into his pocket, heart hammering. This was real. Whoever it was, they weren't going to back down. The confrontation. Jake found Ethan outside by the vending machines during lunch, leaning casually against the brick wall. Jake stormed up to him, shoving the crumpled note against his chest. Ethan blinked, took the note and read it. Then he laughed. Jake's fists clenched. You think this is funny? Ethan shrugged. I think you're letting some coward mess with your head. Jake's face burned. This isn't a joke, Ethan. If they tell Callahan, we're done. Ethan crossed his arms. So don't let them. Jake exhaled sharply. How? If they go to Callahan first, we lose everything. Ethan tilted his head. Then we get ahead of them. Jake frowned. What are you talking about? Ethan smirked. We turn it on them. Whoever this is, they're playing dirty. So we play dirtier. Jake took a step back, a sick feeling twisting in his gut. You want to lie again? Ethan rolled his eyes. It's not lying. It's protecting ourselves. Jake shook his head. No. I can't do this anymore. Ethan's expression darkened. Then what? You're gonna confess? Get us both suspended. Jake swallowed hard. He didn't want to go down. But he didn't want to keep sinking either. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Jake sat in his last class, staring at his notebook but seeing nothing. His mind raced. Confess and lose everything. Stay silent and live in fear. He had to make a choice. The weight of it pressed down on him, suffocating. And then, like a whisper in the back of his mind, he knew. He had already made it. Jake's footsteps echoed down the hallway as he approached Mr. Callahan's office. His palms were sweaty, his heartbeat erratic. This was it, the moment he had been dreading since the second he agreed to cheat. A confession. He knocked once, hesitating. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe whoever sent the notes was bluffing. Maybe if he just kept his head down, everything would go away. But deep down, Jake knew better. Before he could turn back, the door creaked open. Mr. Callahan stood there, eyes sharp as ever. Carter. What brings you here? Jake swallowed. Can I talk to you? Callahan studied him for a moment, then nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The confession. The office smelled like old books and strong coffee. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, and a small bulletin board was filled with reminders and schedules. Jake sat across from his teacher, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. Callahan leaned back, arms crossed. Go ahead. Jake inhaled sharply. I need to tell you something about the last exam. Callahan didn't react, just waited. Jake forced himself to continue. I cheated. The word felt like acid in his mouth. I had the answers before the test, he admitted, voice shaking. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I did it. Silence. Callahan didn't speak for what felt like forever. Then finally he sighed. Who gave you the answers? Jake's stomach twisted. Ethan. If he told the truth, Ethan would be dragged down with him. But if he lied, Callahan might not believe him at all. Jake hesitated. Mr. Carter, Callahan said firmly. I need the truth. Now. Jake exhaled, staring at the desk. Ethan was the one who got them. He convinced me to use them. But I still made the choice to go through with it. Callahan's expression remained unreadable. You understand the consequences of what you're saying? Jake nodded. Callahan leaned forward. Why tell me now? Jake hesitated, then pulled the crumpled notes from his pocket, handing them over. Someone was threatening to expose me. I didn't want this to get worse. Callahan studied the notes, frowning. Do you know who sent these? Jake shook his head. No. But whoever it is, they knew. Callahan let out a slow breath, setting the notes aside. I appreciate your honesty, Jake. But this isn't just going to go away. There will be disciplinary action. Jake nodded, his throat tight. I know. The fallout. Jake spent the rest of the day waiting for the hammer to drop. It didn't take long. By the time school ended, the principal had been informed. He was called to the office, where he sat across from Mr. Callahan and the head of the disciplinary committee. His punishment was clear. A0 on the test. 2 weeks of academic probation. A formal note in his record. He got off easier than he expected. But Ethan wouldn't. Jake wasn't there when they called him in, but he saw Ethan's face when he stormed out of the office. Fury. Pure seething rage. Ethan didn't say a word as he passed Jake in the hallway, but his glare said enough. This wasn't over. The truth comes out. As Jake grabbed his books from his locker, he heard someone approach. He turned to see Zoe. The one person he hadn't expected. She crossed her arms. So, you finally did it. Jake frowned. You. Zoe rolled her eyes. Yeah. It was me. Jake's mind reeled. You wrote the notes? Of course, she said. I saw Ethan snooping around Callahan's desk before the test. I knew something was up. Jake exhaled sharply. Why not just tell Callahan yourself? Zoe's expression softened. I wanted you to do the right thing. Jake blinked. Why? She sighed. Because you're better than Ethan. And I knew you'd break eventually. Jake swallowed hard. Did I make the right choice? Zoe gave him a small, almost sad smile. You did what you had to do. That's what matters. Jake wasn't sure if that was true. But at least for the first time in weeks he could breathe.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to The Cost of a Shortcut. Written by Akumah and voiceover by Cora.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 5. The Aftermath. Jake always thought that if he ever got caught cheating his world would end. Now that it had actually happened, he realized the world didn't stop spinning. But it sure felt different. For the first time since the confession, he walked through the school hallways without looking over his shoulder. No more notes. No more threats. No more living with the secret. But that didn't mean things were easy. The fallout was immediate. Ethan was suspended for a week. Unlike Jake, he hadn't confessed, which only made the school come down on him harder. Rumors spread fast. Some people called Jake a rat, others admired him for coming clean. But Ethan wasn't the type to forget. And from the way he stared at Jake in the hall, like he was planning 100 different ways to get revenge, Jake knew their friendship was over. A broken friendship. Jake sat at his usual lunch table, but for the first time in years, it felt empty. Ethan was gone, his absence more noticeable than Jake expected. A couple of his teammates from basketball glanced at him but didn't say anything. No one outright ignored him, but there was an awkwardness in the air. He had betrayed someone. And even if Ethan had deserved it, people didn't forget things like that. Jake pushed his food around his tray, barely eating. Then someone sat down across from him. Zoe. She raised an eyebrow. So, how does it feel to be a school legend? Jake let out a short, humorless laugh. Legend? More like outcast. She smirked. Please. Give it a week. The school will find something new to gossip about. Jake sighed. You really believe that? She nodded. Trust me. A few months from now, people won't even remember this. Jake wished he could believe that. But even if the school forgot, he wouldn't. Facing the consequences. Later that evening, Jake sat in the kitchen with his parents. The silence was heavy. His mom sipped her coffee, eyes filled with disappointment but also something softer. Understanding, maybe. His dad, however, wasn't as forgiving. You threw away everything you worked for, his father said, his voice calm but firm. For what? Jake stared at his untouched dinner. I made a mistake. His dad shook his head. A mistake is forgetting to study. Cheating? That's a choice. Jake swallowed hard. I know. His mom sighed. We're not saying you can't fix this, Jake. But trust is hard to rebuild. Jake knew they were right. His teachers would always look at him differently now. His teammates weren't sure if they could trust him. And his own father saw him as a disappointment. One confession wasn't enough to erase what he had done. The only way to fix it was to prove, day by day, that he could be better. Redemption starts small. A week passed. Then Jake didn't let himself slip. He studied harder than ever, making sure he never had to rely on shortcuts again. He met with Mr. Callahan after school to go over his weakest subjects. He even took the initiative to tutor some freshmen struggling with math. The rumors about him eventually faded, replaced by newer scandals and drama. But not everything could be undone. Ethan never spoke to him again. They passed each other in the halls like strangers, the weight of their history lingering but unspoken. And that, more than anything, was the hardest part. The final test. 3 months later, finals season arrived. Jake sat in the same classroom where he had cheated, staring at a new exam paper. No stolen answers. No shortcuts. Just him, his pen, and the work he had put in. He exhaled slowly and started writing. The test wasn't easy. But this time he was ready. And when he handed in his paper, he walked out of the classroom with his head held high. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a fraud. He felt like himself again. The sun cast long shadows across the nearly empty schoolyard as Jake sat alone on the bleachers, his final exam officially behind him. For the first time in months, his mind wasn't occupied with guilt or fear. No more looming consequences. No more whispers behind his back. Just the weight of reality settling in. He had cheated. He had confessed. And now he was left picking up the pieces of his reputation, friendships, and future. But unlike before, he was facing it head-on. A familiar voice broke through his thoughts. "You survived." Jake looked up to see Zoe standing at the bottom of the bleachers, her arms crossed, a teasing smirk on her lips. "Yeah," he said with a short laugh. "Barely." She climbed up and sat beside him, her sneakers tapping against the metal. "So, how do you feel now that it's all over?" Jake thought about it. "Like I can finally breathe," he admitted. "But also, like I don't know what comes next." Zoe studied him. "Well, what do you want to come next?" Jake hesitated. That was the real question, wasn't it? Second chance. A week later, the final exam results were posted. Jake wasn't sure what to expect. He had worked hard, but a part of him still feared he had relied on cheating for so long that he wouldn't be able to stand on his own. But as he scanned the list, he found his name. Jake Carter, B+. Not perfect. Not the best. But his. A grade earned honestly. He let out a slow breath, relief washing over him. "Not bad," Mr. Callahan's voice came from behind him. Jake turned to see his teacher standing there, arms crossed. "You worked for that one," Callahan said. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Jake nodded. "Yeah. It really does." Callahan gave a small nod. "Mistakes don't define you, Carter. How you recover from them does. Keep that in mind." For the first time, Jake believed that. Closing old doors. Later that afternoon, Jake found himself standing outside the gym. Inside, the basketball team was finishing practice. For years, this had been his home. The court, the team, the rhythm of the game. But after everything that happened, he hadn't been sure if he still belonged here. Ethan was there, laughing with some of the other guys. He caught sight of Jake and immediately looked away, his expression unreadable. Jake knew better than to expect forgiveness. Some friendships weren't meant to last. He stepped inside, heart pounding. Coach Ramirez saw him and waved him over. "Carter. Good to see you." Jake took a deep breath. "Coach, I want to rejoin the team." Ramirez studied him for a long moment. "You know it won't be easy. Trust isn't given back overnight." "I know," Jake said. "I'll prove myself. Whatever it takes." The coach nodded slowly. "You start from the bottom. No special treatment. You earn your spot again." Jake grinned. "That's all I ask. New beginnings." The next morning, Jake sat down at his usual spot in the cafeteria, half expecting people to avoid him like they had in the weeks after his confession. Instead, Zoe dropped her tray across from him. "Word on the street is you're back on the team," she said, taking a bite of her apple. "Not officially. I still have to prove myself," Jake said. "That's what you do best, apparently," she teased. Jake rolled his eyes. "You know, for someone who blackmailed me into confessing, you sure stuck around a lot afterward." Zoe smirked. "Someone had to make sure you didn't screw up your redemption arc." Jake shook his head with a laugh. "So what now?" He shrugged. "We graduate soon. Life moves on." Jake glanced around the cafeteria, realizing she was right. The scandal had faded, his name was no longer the center of school gossip, and the weight of the past few months was finally lifting. He had learned the hard way that mistakes could change everything. But they didn't have to define him forever. He wasn't the same person who had looked at that stolen test and chosen the easy way out. He had a second chance. And this time he wasn't going to waste it. Think.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You have reached to the end of the story. Thank you for listening to Akumah Audiobooks. For more stories like this, refer to channel playlist and stay tuned by subscribing to the channel.